Every species in the known galaxy had a survival instinct. The Vorathi had their armored scales. The Krillians had venom that could dissolve bone in seconds. The Draken had 6 arms and claws that could cut through starship hull plating. Every predator race in the Galactic Coalition had something sharp, something fast, something deadly written into their blood and bone. And then there were humans. Small, soft, no claws, no venom, no armor. No natural weapons of any kind, just thin skin and flat teeth and those strange round eyes that blinked too much. When the first human delegation arrived at the Coalition 30 years ago, the predator races had laughed. Some of them had literally opened their jaws wide, which was their version of laughing, and others had clicked their teeth together, which meant the same thing in their culture. The humans had smiled back. Nobody understood at the time that a human smile was not always a sign of friendship. Sometimes it was a warning. But that lesson would take years to learn, and it would be taught by a woman who never raised her voice, never stood in the front, and never once asked for attention. The galaxy would remember her name long after the empires had crumbled. Her name was Mara Cole, and she always sat in the back row. The Galactic Coalition Military Academy was built on a station called Pinnacle. It floated in the dead space between 3 star systems, far from any planet, far from any sun, far from anything that could be called home. This was intentional. The Academy did not want its students to feel comfortable. Comfort made you slow. Comfort made you weak. Comfort got you killed. That was the philosophy of Commander Zael Varric, a Vorathi officer who had served in 4 border conflicts and had lost his left eye to a plasma blade during the Siege of Hollow Sun. He wore the scar like a decoration. He wore his rank like a threat, and he ran the academy like a prison where the inmates were expected to thank him for the punishment. Every cycle, the academy accepted 200 recruits from across the coalition species. Vorathi, Krylian, Draken, Selthari, Malvine, and a dozen other races sent their best young warriors to train together, fight together, and learn together. The idea was that cooperation between species would prevent the kind of wars that had nearly destroyed the galaxy 2 centuries ago. It was a noble idea. In practice, it meant that 200 young predators from different worlds were locked in a metal box in space and told to get along. The results were predictable. Every cycle had its violence. Every cycle had its rivalries. And every cycle, the strong rose to the top and the weak were crushed beneath them. That was the unofficial rule. Commander Varric pretended not to see it. The instructors pretended not to know. And the recruits who survived learned the most important lesson the Academy could teach. The galaxy does not care about fairness. The galaxy only cares about who is still standing when the dust settles. Mara Cole arrived at Pinnacle on a transport shuttle with 11 other human recruits. 12 humans out of 200 total. That was a higher number than usual. Most cycles only had 5 or 6. The humans had been pushing for more representation in the coalition military for years, and this cycle they had finally been given a larger allocation. Some of the other species were not happy about this. The Draken in particular had been vocal in their objections. Their ambassador had called the increased human presence an insult to the warrior traditions of the coalition. He had said that sending more humans to the academy was like sending more food to the table. The comment had caused a diplomatic incident that lasted 3 days. The humans had responded with a formal statement that was polite and measured and revealed absolutely nothing about what they were actually thinking. This was another human trait that the galaxy had not yet learned to fear, the ability to hide what was behind their eyes. On the shuttle, Mara sat by the window and watched the stars. She was 24 years old, average height, average build, with dark hair cut short and brown eyes that never seemed to fully open. She wore the standard grey uniform of a coalition recruit, and she carried a single bag that contained everything she owned. She did not talk to the other human recruits. She did not introduce herself. She did not make jokes or share stories or do any of the social bonding things that humans were famous for. She just sat and watched the stars and breathed slowly and said nothing. The other humans noticed. One of them, a tall man named Reese with broad shoulders and a loud voice, leaned over to the woman sitting next to him and whispered something. The woman, whose name was Tanaka, glanced at Mara and then looked away quickly. There was something in Mara's stillness that made people uncomfortable. Not afraid exactly, just uncomfortable. Like standing next to a lake that was perfectly calm and knowing that the calm meant the water was very, very deep. When the shuttle docked at Pinnacle, the recruits were processed through intake. They were scanned, measured, catalogued, and assigned to barracks. The barracks were organized by species, which meant the 12 humans were placed together in a long room with metal bunks and a single window that looked out into the void. Mara took the bunk farthest from the door, in the corner where the light was dimmest. She set down her bag, made her bed with precise mechanical movements, and then sat on the edge of the mattress with her hands on her knees. She looked like she was waiting for something. The other humans unpacked and talked and tried to fill the silence. Mara did not join them. The first assembly was held the next morning in the central hall. It was a massive room with tiered seating that rose up in a semicircle around a raised platform. 200 recruits filed in and found their seats. The Vorathi sat in the front, of course. They always sat in the front. Their culture valued dominance displays, and taking the highest position in any room was considered a sign of strength. The Draken sat in the middle rows, their 6 arms folded in various combinations that communicated different emotional states. The Krillians clustered together on the left side, their long tails curled around the legs of their chairs. The Salthari, who were thin and pale and had 4 eyes, sat wherever there was space. They did not care about position. They cared about sightlines. The humans scattered. Some sat with allies they had already made. Some sat alone. Reese sat in the 4th row, right behind a group of Vorathi, as if daring them to notice him. Tanaka sat near the Salthari, who seemed to tolerate her presence. The other humans filled in gaps here and there, and Mira walked past all of them, past every row, past every seat, until she reached the very last row at the very top of the hall. She sat in the corner. She folded her hands in her lap, and she watched. Commander Varric walked onto the platform. He was tall for a Vorathi, nearly 7 feet, with dark green scales and one eye that glowed amber, and one eye that was a dead, milky white. He wore his dress uniform, which was black with silver markings that indicated his rank and his kills. Among the Vorathi, officers wore a mark for every enemy they had killed in battle. Varric's uniform had so many marks that they overlapped. He did not greet the recruits. He did not welcome them. He stood on the platform and looked at them with his one good eye, and he let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. This was a Vorathi technique. Silence was a weapon. Silence told the listener that the speaker did not need their attention. The speaker already had their fear. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. He said that they were the worst group of recruits he had ever seen. He said that half of them would wash out before the first evaluation. He said that the ones who survived would wish they had not. He said that the academy would break them down and rebuild them into something useful, or it would break them down and discard them. There was no third option. Then he looked up at the back row, directly at Mara. She was the only recruit sitting that far back, the only one who had chosen the position of least visibility. Among the Vorathi, sitting in the back was a sign of submission. It meant you knew your place. It meant you accepted your weakness. It meant you were prey. Varric's lip curled, showing a row of sharp teeth. He looked at Mara for a long time. Then he looked away and continued his speech. But the damage was done. Every predator in the room had followed his gaze. Every predator had seen the small human sitting alone in the back corner. And every predator had made the same calculation. She was the weakest. She would be the easiest. She would be first. The training cycle at Pinnacle was divided into 3 phases. The first phase was assessment. For 6 weeks, the recruits would be tested in every measurable way. Physical endurance, combat skills, tactical thinking, weapons proficiency, pain tolerance, stress response, team coordination, and a dozen other categories. The assessments were designed to establish a baseline and to create a ranking. The ranking determined everything. It determined which assignments you received, which instructors you trained under, which teams you were placed on, and how much respect you were given. A high ranking meant opportunity. A low ranking meant suffering. The first assessment was a physical endurance test. The recruits were taken to a large gymnasium and told to run, not on a track, not on flat ground. The gymnasium had been reconfigured into an obstacle course that included climbing walls, water barriers, low gravity zones, high gravity zones, temperature extremes, and sections where the floor was electrified at random intervals. The course was designed to test every species equally, which meant it was designed to be unfair to everyone in different ways. The Vorathi struggled in the low-gravity sections because their heavy bodies were built for high-gravity worlds. The Krillians struggled in the cold sections because their reptilian biology slowed in low temperatures. The Drakons struggled with the narrow passages because their 6 arms made them wide and bulky. The humans struggled with almost everything. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. They were not the most resistant to pain or temperature or gravity changes. On paper, they should have finished last in every category. But they did not. The humans had something that the tests could not measure. They had stubbornness. A human body would scream for rest, and a human mind would say no. A human would hit a wall, literally or figuratively, and instead of stopping, they would find a way around it or through it or over it. The Vorathi called this trait madness. The Selthari called it inefficiency. The humans called it Tuesday. Mara ran the course in silence. She did not grunt or shout or curse like the other recruits. She did not pause to catch her breath or shake the pain from her limbs. She moved through the obstacles with a steady, mechanical efficiency that was almost unsettling to watch. She was not fast. She was not graceful. But she never stopped. When she hit the electrified floor section, she did not flinch. When she entered the high-gravity zone, her steps slowed but did not stop. When she pulled herself over the final climbing wall, her arms were shaking and her face was pale, and there was blood on her palms where the rough surface had torn her skin. But her expression had not changed, not once. She finished in the middle of the pack. Not impressive, not embarrassing, completely unremarkable. And that was exactly what she wanted. After the assessment, the recruits were given 2 hours of rest before the evening meal. Most of them collapsed in their barracks or gathered in the common areas to compare injuries and complain. Mara went to the observation deck. It was a long, narrow room with a transparent wall that looked out into space. It was usually empty because most species found the view of endless void unsettling. Mara stood at the window and looked out at nothing and everything. She was not alone for long. A Draken recruit named Keth found her there. Keth was young for a Draken, only about 20 in human years, but he was already massive. 8 feet tall, with 6 arms that were thick with muscle and covered in dark red chitin. His face was broad and flat, with a wide mouth full of interlocking teeth that could crush stone. His eyes were small and black and placed on the sides of his head, which gave him nearly 360 degrees of vision. He was, by any standard, a perfect predator. Built to hunt, built to kill, built to dominate. He walked up to Mara and stood beside her. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Keth made a sound that was halfway between a click and a growl. In Draken body language, this was a dominance display. It meant, I am bigger than you. I am stronger than you. Acknowledge this. Mara blinked at him. Then she turned back to the window and continued looking at the stars. She did not acknowledge his display. She did not respond. She did not flinch or step back or show any sign that she had understood what he was communicating. To a Draken, this was the worst possible response. Ignoring a dominance display was not submission. It was something else entirely. It was dismissal. Keth's chitin plates shifted, which meant he was agitated. He stepped closer. His shadow fell over Mara completely. She was small enough that he could have wrapped one of his 6 arms around her twice. He made the sound again. Louder this time. A direct challenge. Respond or face consequences. Mara did not turn around. She said 3 words in a voice that was quiet and flat and carried no emotion at all. She said, not right now. Keth stood there for a long time. He was confused. In his experience, small creatures either fought back or submitted. They did not simply decline to participate. He did not know what to do with a creature that was clearly weaker than him but refused to act like it. After a full minute of silence, Keth turned and walked away. His chitin plates were still shifting. He was still agitated. And underneath the agitation there was something new. Something he had never felt before when looking at a smaller creature. It took him 3 days to identify the emotion. It was unease. That night in the barracks, the human recruits gathered in the common area between the bunks. They talked about the assessment, about the other species, about the instructors. Reese was doing most of the talking because Reese always did most of the talking. He was telling a story about how he had outrun a Vorathi in the high-gravity section, and the other humans were laughing and adding details and correcting him when he exaggerated, which was often. Mara was on her bunk in the corner, reading something on a datapad. Tanaka walked over and sat on the edge of the bunk across from her. Tanaka was quiet too. but a different kind of quiet. She was quiet because she was observing. Mara was quiet because she was something else. Tanaka said, "You know they have already noticed you." Mara did not look up from her datapad. "Who?" "Everyone. The Draken. The Varati. Even the Krylians. You sit in the back alone and you do not react to anything. To predator species, that is either a challenge or an invitation." Mara scrolled through something on her datapad. Which do they think it is? An invitation. They think you are weak. They think you are the easy target. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." Tanaka waited for more. There was no more. Mara went back to her reading. Tanaka sat there for another few seconds, studying the other woman's face. She saw nothing. No fear, no confidence, no anger, no plan. Just calm, steady stillness, like the surface of that deep, dark lake. Tanaka went back to the common area and sat down next to Reese. He asked her what Mara had said. Tanaka shook her head. She said, "Good." Reese frowned. "Good? Good that they think she is weak. That is not good. That is dangerous." Tanaka looked back at Mara's corner. The light from the datapad cast a faint blue glow on her face. She was still reading, still calm, still perfectly, absolutely still. "I know," Tanaka said, "but I do not think she was talking about herself being in danger." Reese opened his mouth to ask what that meant. Then he closed it. Then he opened it again. Then he looked at Mara's corner and felt something cold move through his chest. It was not fear exactly. It was the feeling you got when you realized that you had been looking at something wrong, that the picture you had been seeing was not the real picture, that the quiet woman in the back row was not hiding from the predators. She was doing something else entirely, something patient, something deliberate, something that the predators would not understand until it was far too late. The next morning, the second assessment began, combat evaluation. And the predators were already circling. Combat evaluation at Pinnacle was not a polite exercise. There were no padded floors. There were no referees standing at the edge with whistles ready to stop the match if someone got hurt. The Academy believed that real combat was ugly and painful and terrifying, and the only way to prepare for it was to experience something close to the real thing. So the evaluation was held in a space called the Crucible. It was a circular arena, with a sand floor and high walls and seating that wrapped around the full circumference so that every recruit who was not fighting could watch those who were. The sand was dark grey, almost black, and it was mixed with a chemical compound that absorbed blood quickly so the floor would not become slippery during extended sessions. The fact that this was a design consideration told you everything you needed to know about what happened in the Crucible. The rules were simple. 2 recruits entered the ring. They fought until one of them could not continue, or one of them yielded. Lethal force was prohibited, but the definition of lethal was interpreted loosely. Broken bones were common. Dislocated joints were expected. Concussions were considered part of the learning experience. The medical team stood by with field kits and bone sealant and regeneration patches, but they did not enter the ring until the match was over. If you were hurt, you kept fighting or you yielded. Those were your options. The matchups were determined by the instructors, and the instructors were not kind. They paired recruits in ways designed to create the most useful data, which often meant pairing recruits in ways designed to create the most dramatic mismatches. A small Selthari against a large Vorathi. A fast Krylian against a strong Draken. The strong learned how to fight the fast. The fast learned how to fight the strong. Everyone learned how to take a hit. Mara's name was called in the 3rd round of the first day. Her opponent was a Vorathi recruit named Dren. He was not the largest Vorathi in the cycle, but he was close. 6.5 feet tall, with thick green scales and heavy clawed hands, and a tail that was muscled enough to sweep the legs out from under a charging bull. He had been a fighter on his homeworld before joining the Academy. He had won tournaments. He had broken bones for sport and entertainment. When his name was called alongside Mara's, he had smiled, which for a Vorathi meant pulling back the lips to show all 4 rows of teeth. The recruits in the stands who knew anything about Vorathi body language understood that this was not just confidence. It was anticipation. Dren was looking forward to this. Mara walked into the ring with the same unhurried pace she used for everything. She did not stretch or warm up or bounce on her toes the way the other human recruits had before their matches. She stood in her starting position with her hands at her sides and her weight balanced evenly on both feet. She looked at Dren the way she looked at everything, calmly. quietly, with those half-closed eyes that gave nothing away. Dren walked to his starting position and dropped into a fighting stance, his claws extended. His tail swept the sand behind him. His scales shifted color slightly, darkening along his spine, which was an involuntary predator response. His body was preparing for a kill. Every instinct coded into millions of years of Vorthar evolution was telling him the same thing. The small creature in front of you is prey. Take it down. Take it fast. Take it now. The instructor signaled the start of the match. Dren charged. He was fast for his size. He crossed the distance between them in less than 2 seconds and swung his right arm in a wide arc aimed at Mara's head. The blow had enough force behind it to crack a concrete wall. If it connected, the match would be over. The medical team would rush in. Mara would be carried out on a stretcher. That was the expectation. The blow did not connect. Mara moved. Not dramatically. Not with the flashy acrobatics that some of the faster species used. She simply was not where the blow landed. She shifted her weight, turned her body, and let Dren's arm pass through the space where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier. It was a small movement. Precise. Economical. And it put her directly beside Dren's overextended body. She hit him. Once. A single strike with the heel of her palm, delivered to the soft tissue beneath his jaw where the scales were thinnest. It was not a hard hit by Vorathi standards. A Vorathi would barely feel it from another Vorathi. But Mara had not aimed at a random spot. She had aimed at the cluster of nerve endings that connected the Vorathi jaw to the brain. It was a specific anatomical point that most species did not know about because most species had never bothered to study Vorathi anatomy in that much detail. Dren's head snapped to the side. His vision blurred. His legs did not stop working, but they stopped coordinating, and he stumbled sideways 2 steps before catching himself. He shook his head, confused. The pain was sharp and strange, not like a normal hit. It felt like someone had reached inside his skull and flicked a switch. He turned back to Mara. She was standing in the same relaxed posture, hands at her sides, weight balanced, eyes half closed. She had not followed up on the strike. She had not pressed the advantage. She was just standing there, waiting. The stands were quiet. The other recruits had expected the match to be over in seconds. They had expected to see the human crumpled on the sand. Instead, the human was standing, and the Vorathi was shaking his head like he had been stung by something he could not see. Dren charged again. This time he was angry. And angry Vorathi were dangerous but predictable. He came in with both arms swinging in alternating strikes, using his tail as a counterbalance. It was a standard Vorathi assault pattern, designed to overwhelm a target with speed and power from multiple angles. Against most opponents, it was effective. Against Mara, it looked like a large animal thrashing at empty air. She moved through his attacks like water through a net, every strike missed by inches. She did not block, because blocking a Vorathi's full-strength blow would shatter human bones. She did not counter, because countering required committing to a position, and Mara never committed to a position. She just moved. Constant, fluid, unhurried movement that kept her exactly where Dren's claws were not. And while she moved, she hit him. Small strikes, targeted strikes. A knuckle to the inside of his elbow where the joint was exposed, 2 fingers pressed hard against the nerve cluster behind his knee. A quick tap to the base of his tail where the spinal column connected to the pelvis. None of the strikes were powerful. None of them drew blood. But each one targeted a specific weakness in the Vorathi anatomy, and each one accumulated damage that Dren could feel building in his body like a slow poison. After 2 minutes, Dren was breathing hard. His arms felt heavy. His tail was not responding the way it should. His left leg was numb from the knee down. He had not landed a single hit on the human, not one. He had fought Vorathi warriors twice his size and drawn blood within seconds. He had faced Draken in tournament combat and held his ground. He had never, in his entire life, fought something he could not touch. He stopped charging and stood in the center of the ring, breathing hard, his scales shifting through agitated patterns of dark green and brown. He looked at Mara. She was not breathing hard. She was not sweating. She was standing 5 feet away with her hands at her sides and her expression unchanged, and she was watching him with those half-closed eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. In the stands, Keth the Draken was leaning forward. All 6 of his arms were pressed against the railing. His small black eyes were fixed on the ring. He was not watching Dren. He was watching Mara. and the unease he had felt 3 days ago on the observation deck was growing into something larger, something colder. Dren made a decision. He dropped low and swept his tail in a wide arc across the sand, aiming for Mara's legs. It was a desperation move, a move that sacrificed defensive position for a chance at a takedown. If he could get her on the ground, his size advantage would end the fight. The tail swept fast and low, cutting through the air with a sound like a whip. Mara jumped. Not high, just enough for the tail to pass beneath her feet. And as she came down, she landed on the tail, both feet on the flat of the tail, pinning it to the sand. Dren felt the sudden weight and tried to pull free, but Mara was already moving. She stepped off the tail, stepped forward, and drove her elbow into the precise center of Dren's forehead, directly between the eyes, where the Vorathi skull was thinnest. The sound was sharp and wet. Dren's amber eyes rolled back. His legs folded. He went down on his knees first, then forward onto his face. The dark sand puffed up around his body as he landed. He did not move. The crucible was silent. Mara stood over the fallen Vorathi. She was not celebrating. She was not posturing. She looked down at Dren for a moment, and then she turned and walked out of the ring with the same unhurried pace she had used to enter it. She did not look at the stands. She did not acknowledge the silence. The medical team rushed into the ring. Dren was alive. He had a concussion and 3 separate nerve clusters that had been disrupted, which meant he would have trouble coordinating his right arm and his tail for at least a week. The medics were confused by the pattern of injuries. They had never seen anything like it. The damage was surgical. Every strike had targeted a specific vulnerability with a precision that suggested deep knowledge of Vorathi anatomy, not the kind of knowledge you got from a textbook, the kind of knowledge you got from studying something with the intent to take it apart. In the stands, the Predator recruits were reassessing. The quiet human who sat in the back row had just dismantled a trained Vorathi fighter without taking a single hit. She had done it calmly, efficiently, and without any visible emotion. This was not the behavior of prey. Prey ran. Prey panicked. Prey fought with desperation and fear. Mara had fought with the cold precision of something that had practiced this exact scenario many times. Something that had known exactly what would happen before the first blow was thrown. But the Predators did not update their assessment the way they should have, because Predator psychology has a blind spot. When a Predator sees something small defeat something large, the Predator does not think perhaps the small thing is dangerous. The Predator thinks, I am not that large thing. I am smarter. I am faster. I am better. The large thing was careless. I will not be careless. This blind spot is the reason that predator species kept underestimating humans for so long. It was not because the evidence was lacking. It was because the predators could not accept what the evidence was telling them. Over the next 3 days, the combat evaluations continued. Mara fought twice more, once against a Kryllian and once against a Malvine. The Kryllian was fast, faster than Dren, with a venomous tail spike that could paralyze a human in seconds. Mara avoided the tail by staying at angles that the Kryllian's body mechanics could not easily reach and wore her down with strikes to the heat-sensitive organs along the Kryllian's sides. The Kryllian yielded after 4 minutes, disoriented and overheating. The Malvine was different. Malvine were aquatic predators who had evolved to fight in 3 dimensions. They were flexible, unpredictable, and their boneless bodies could absorb impacts that would shatter rigid skeletons. Mara spent the first minute of the fight doing nothing but dodging while the Malvine twisted and struck from impossible angles. Then she found the rhythm. Every species had a rhythm, a pattern in their movement that came from the way their body was built. Once she found it, she exploited it. She targeted the Malvine's gill slits with open palm strikes that disrupted airflow, and the Malvine went down choking on atmosphere it could normally breathe without trouble. 3 fights, 3 victories, 0 hits taken. And still, Mara's official ranking remained in the middle of the pack because the assessment system weighted physical baselines heavily, and humans had some of the lowest physical baselines of any species in the coalition. Mara did not complain about the ranking. She did not draw attention to the discrepancy. She went back to her bunk in the corner and read her data pad and said nothing. But the other recruits were talking. Not the humans. The humans were being very quiet about Mara, which was itself a kind of communication. The other species were talking. The Selthari, who valued observation above all else, were particularly interested. A Selthari recruit named Vess had watched all 3 of Mara's fights with her 4 eyes recording every detail, and she had come to a conclusion that she shared with her bunkmate, another Selthari named Oren. She said, "The human knows how to kill every species in this academy." Oren blinked all 4 eyes at once, which was the Selthari expression of surprise. "Every species. You are certain. Watch her when others fight. She does not watch the action. She watches the anatomy. She is studying how each species moves, where they are vulnerable, how they react to different kinds of pain. She has already mapped the weaknesses of the Varati, the Krillian, and the Malvine. She is working on the Draken now. That is standard tactical behavior. All recruits study their opponents. Not like this. Other recruits study how to fight opponents. She is studying how to end them. There is a difference." Oren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Should we be concerned?" Vest turned 2 of her 4 eyes toward the human barracks, where the light in Mara's corner was still on, the faint blue glow of a datapad, illuminating a face that showed nothing. "I do not know, but I think the predators should be." The predators were not concerned. Not yet. They were angry, which was different. Dren's defeat had embarrassed the Vorothi recruits, and embarrassment among Vorothi translated directly into aggression. A group of 5 Vorothi recruits had decided that Mara's victory was a fluke, the result of Dren's overconfidence rather than Mara's skill. They decided to correct this perception in the way that Voratha traditionally corrected things, through force. It happened in the corridor outside the mess hall on the 5th day. Mara was walking alone, as she always did, heading back to the barracks after the evening meal. The corridor was long and narrow, with dim lighting and no security monitors because the academy believed that recruits should handle their own problems. The 5 Vorathi were waiting around a corner. They had chosen this spot because the corridor was too narrow for Mara to maneuver, which they believed would negate her ability to dodge. They were right about the geometry. They were wrong about everything else. The largest of the 5, a female Vorathi named Cheska, stepped out in front of Mara. The other 4 closed in behind. Mara stopped walking. She looked at Cheska. She looked behind her at the other 4. She looked at the walls of the corridor, measuring the width. Then she looked back at Cheska. "This is not a good idea," Mara said. Her voice was the same as always. Quiet. Flat. No emotion. Cheska showed her teeth. "You beat Dren because he was stupid. You will not beat 5 of us." It was the most expression anyone had ever seen her display. "You are right," she said. "I will not beat 5 of you in a narrow corridor. I will hurt 2 of you badly enough that they will need medical attention. 1 of you will lose the use of an arm for several weeks, and the other 2 will put me down because the math does not work in my favor. I will end up in the medical bay. You will end up with a disciplinary review that could affect your careers. Nobody wins." She said it the way a person reads a weather report. "These are the facts. This is what will happen." There is no emotion involved. The 5 Vorathi looked at each other. Sheska's scales were dark with aggression, but there was something flickering behind her amber eyes. Uncertainty, not because she doubted that 5 Vorathi could beat 1 human. She did not doubt that. What she doubted was the cost. Mara had described the outcome not as a threat, but as a calculation. She had told them exactly how much damage she would do before they brought her down, and the specificity of the prediction was more unnerving than any boast or challenge could have been. Footsteps. Multiple sets. The 12 human recruits walked around the corner. Reese was in front, his arms crossed, his jaw set. Tanaka was beside him, calm and watchful. The other 10 humans fanned out behind them, filling the corridor from wall to wall. Reese smiled at the Vorathi. It was a human smile, wide and warm and completely meaningless. "Evening," he said. The 5 Vorathi looked at the 12 humans. The math had changed. Sheska unclenched her claws and stepped back. She said something to Mara in Vorathi, which roughly translated to, "This is not over." Then the 5 of them turned and walked away with the rigid, controlled movements of predators retreating from an encounter they had not expected to lose. When they were gone, Reese turned to Mara. "You knew they were going to be there." It was not a question. Mara did not answer it like one. she said. The Vorathi follow predictable escalation patterns. Dren was embarrassed 5 days ago. 5 days is the standard Vorathi grievance period before retaliation. The corridor outside the mess hall is the most common ambush point in the academy, based on the layout and the lack of monitoring. I would have been surprised if they had not been here. Reese stared at her. You walked into it on purpose. I walked into it because avoiding it would have delayed it. Delayed confrontations escalate. Immediate confrontations resolve. And if we had not showed up? Mara looked at him. For the first time since he had known her, he thought he saw something behind those half-closed eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something close to acknowledgement. I told them the truth, she said. I would have hurt 2 of them badly. They would have put me in the medical bay, and then they would have had to explain to Commander Varik why 5 Vorathi attacked 1 human in a corridor. The consequences for them would have been worse than the consequences for me. The math always mattered more than the fight. She walked through the group of humans and continued toward the barracks. The other humans watched her go. Reese looked at Tanaka. She is terrifying, he said. Tanaka nodded. Yes, but she is our kind of terrifying. They followed her back to the barracks. And in the darkness of the corridor behind them, a Selthari recruit named Vess stood in the shadows with all 4 her eyes wide open. She had seen everything. She had heard everything. And she was beginning to understand that the quiet human in the back row was not just a skilled fighter. She was something the Academy had never encountered before. She was a weapon that had chosen to look like a person. And the predators, with all their claws and scales and venom, had no idea what was coming for them. The second phase of training at Pinnacle was called integration. The assessments were over, the rankings were set, and now the real work began. Integration meant team operations. The recruits were divided into squads of 8 and given missions to complete in simulated combat environments. The simulations were complex, involving objectives that required coordination between species with different abilities, different instincts, and different ideas about how to solve problems. The purpose was to force recruits to work together even when their biology told them to work apart. A Vorathi's instinct was to charge to the front and dominate. A Krillian's instinct was to flank and strike from the shadows. A Draken's instinct was to overwhelm with brute force from multiple angles. A Selthari's instinct was to observe and calculate before acting. A human's instinct was unpredictable, which was part of the problem and part of the point. The squads were assigned by the instructors, and the assignments were not random. Each squad was designed to create a specific mix of strength and weaknesses, and the instructors watched carefully to see how each squad adapted. Some squads came together quickly, finding natural hierarchies and communication patterns that worked. Some squads fell apart immediately, torn by species conflicts and ego battles and the inability of predators to accept direction from creatures they considered inferior. The squads that failed were dissolved and reassembled. The squads that succeeded were given harder missions. Mara was assigned to Squad 7. The composition was deliberate, and, from the outside, looked like a punishment. The squad included 2 Vorathi, 1 Draken, 1 Krillian, 2 Selthari, and 2 humans. Mara was one of the humans. The other was Reese. The Draken was Keth, the same recruit who had tried to dominance display Mara on the observation deck. The Vorathi was Sheska, who had led the corridor ambush, and a younger male named Tor, who had not been involved but who shared Sheska's views about humans. The Krillian was a sleek, fast female named Riss, whose venom sacs were larger than average, a trait she was openly proud of. The 2 Selthari were Vess and Oren, the observers who had already figured out more about Mara than anyone else in the Academy. 8 recruits, 4 predator species, 2 humans, and enough existing conflict to guarantee that the squad would either become extraordinary or destroy itself. Their first mission briefing was held in a small room off the main training complex. The 8 recruits filed in and took seats around a table. Keth took the seat at the head of the table because Draken always took the largest position in any room. Sheska sat across from Mara and stared at her with barely contained hostility. Tor sat next to Sheska, mirroring her posture. Riss coiled her tail around her chair and watched everyone with the unblinking focus of a Krellian assessing threats. Vess and Oren sat together, their 4 eyes each scanning the room in overlapping patterns that covered every angle. Reese sat next to Mara and cracked his knuckles, which was his version of preparation. The briefing was delivered by an instructor named Halloran. She was human, one of the few human instructors at the Academy, and she had the kind of face that had seen too many things to be surprised by anything anymore. She was in her 50s, grey-haired, lean, and she spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who had given 1,000 briefings and did not intend to waste a single word on this one. She told them the scenario. A mining station on a simulated asteroid had been seized by hostile forces. The station had 40 civilian workers who were being held as leverage. The hostile force consisted of combat drones programmed to behave like different species, so the squad would face simulated enemies that fought like Vorathi, Krillian, and Draken in various combinations. The objective was to breach the station, neutralize the hostile forces, and extract the civilians within a 60-minute window. After 60 minutes, the simulation would trigger a reactor overload and the station would be destroyed. The briefing included station layouts, drone specifications, environmental hazards, and extraction routes. It was a standard tactical problem with a dozen possible solutions, each with different risk profiles. Halloran finished the briefing, set a data pad on the table with all the relevant files, and left the room without asking if there were questions. Questions were for recruits who could not figure things out on their own. The moment the door closed, Keth spoke. His voice was deep and resonant, the kind of voice that carried authority in any species. I will lead this mission. We breached through the main cargo bay, which is the widest entry point and allows the greatest force concentration. The Vorathi take point. The Draken, that is me, provide heavy support. The Krillian flanks. The Selthari provide intelligence. The humans stay in the rear and handle extraction. It was a straightforward plan. It was the kind of plan that a Draken would make because it relied on strength and direct force, and it put the most physically powerful species at the front. It was also, from a tactical standpoint, deeply flawed. Mara said nothing. Reese looked at her. He could see that she had already identified the problems with the plan. He could see it in the slight tension around her eyes, the only physical sign she ever gave that her mind was working on something. He waited for her to speak. She did not. Sheska noticed the silence. The human has something to say. Mara looked up from the datapad she had been studying. She looked at each squad member in turn. Then she looked at the station layout displayed on the wall screen. The cargo bay is a kill box, she said. The drones will be concentrated there because it is the obvious breach point. Force concentration is the enemy's advantage, not ours. Entering through the cargo bay puts our strongest fighters in a bottleneck where their mobility is restricted, and the drones can apply crossfire from elevated positions on both sides. We will take heavy casualties in the first 30 seconds. Keth's chitin plates shifted. Draken do not fear casualties. This is not about fear. This is about mathematics. If we lose 2 squad members in the breach, we have 6 people to clear a station designed for a force of 12. The 60-minute window becomes impossible. We fail the mission. Tor snorted, a Vorathi sound of contempt. Then what do you suggest, human? We sneak in like cowards. She pulled up the station schematic on the wall screen and pointed to a section on the lower level. The station has a waste processing system that vents into open space through a series of pipes. The pipes are narrow, too narrow for Vorathi or Draken, but wide enough for a human, or a Krillian, or a Selthari. 3 of us enter through the waste system while the remaining 5 create a diversion at the cargo bay. The diversion draws the drone concentration to the cargo bay. The infiltration team moves through the lower levels to the reactor control room and disables the drone command network from inside. Once the drones lose coordination, the breach team enters and cleans up. Silence. Keth looked at the schematic, his 6 arms uncrossed 1 pair at a time, which was a Draken body language sign of reluctant consideration. He could see the logic. He did not like it, but he could see it. Sheska was less accommodating. You want the strongest fighters to be the distraction while you crawl through garbage pipes. This puts us at risk so you can take the glory. Mara looked at Sheska. There was no anger in her expression. There was no defensiveness. There was just the calm, patient attention of someone who had expected this objection and had already accounted for it. The diversion team will face the heaviest combat, but on their own terms. You control the engagement distance. You control the timing. You pull back when pressure increases and push forward when it decreases. You are not trying to breach. You are trying to hold attention. Your strength and durability make you ideal for sustained engagement. The infiltration team faces less combat but more risk from environmental hazards and the possibility of being detected in a confined space with no escape route. Both roles are dangerous. Both roles are necessary. Vess spoke for the first time. The plan is sound. All four of her eyes were fixed on the schematic. The probability of mission success with the direct breach approach is approximately 31% based on the drone specifications and the station layout. The probability of success with the split approach is approximately 60 to 8%. Oren nodded. Confirmed. I ran the same calculation. The room was quiet again. Keth looked at Mara. She looked back at him. She did not push. She did not argue. She had presented the facts, the logic, and the numbers, and now she was waiting for him to make a decision. She was giving him the space to lead, which was either an act of genuine deference or one of the most sophisticated manipulation techniques in any species playbook. Keth could not tell which. That itself was informative. He uncrossed his final pair of arms. We used the human's plan. Sheska's scales darkened, but she did not object. Tora looked at the floor. Riss flicked her tail once, a Krillian gesture of acceptance. And Mara went back to studying the data pad as if the entire negotiation had been a minor interruption to her actual work. The simulation began 4 hours later. The squad moved through the simulated asteroid environment in two groups. Keth led the diversion team with Sheska, Tor, and Reese. Keth had insisted on including Reese with the diversion team because he wanted a human in his group. He did not say why, but the reason was transparent. He wanted to keep an eye on at least one of the humans. Reese did not mind. He was a frontline fighter by nature, big and loud and comfortable with direct engagement. He fit the diversion team better anyway. The infiltration team was Mara, Riss, Vess, and Oren. 4 beings from 4 different species crawling through waste pipes in a simulated asteroid while combat drones patrolled above them. It should have been a disaster. It was not. Mara led from the front. She moved through the pipes with a silence that impressed even Riss, whose species had evolved to stalk prey in total darkness. She navigated the route from memory, having memorized the schematic in the briefing room, and she communicated with hand signals that she had adapted for each species in the team. Different signals for Riss, whose Krillian eyes processed movement differently than mammalian eyes. Different signals for Vess and Oren, whose 4-eyed vision meant they could track multiple signal points simultaneously. She had worked out these adaptations in the 4 hours between the briefing and the mission start. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody had even thought of it. She had simply identified a communication problem and solved it before it became a problem. They reached the reactor control room in 18 minutes. 2 combat drones were guarding the room. Mara assessed them through a ventilation grate. One was programmed with Vorathi combat patterns. The other was programmed with Krillian patterns. She looked at Riss. Then she looked at the Krillian pattern drone. The message was clear. You know how your species fights. You know the weaknesses. Riss's eyes narrowed. For a Krillian, this was a smile. She understood. She had spent her entire life training to fight like a Krillian, which meant she knew exactly how to counter Krillian fighting patterns. Mara was not asking her to fight something alien. She was asking her to fight herself. Mara took the Vorathi pattern drone. Riss took the Krillian pattern drone. Vess and Oren provided Overwatch with their multi-directional vision, calling out movements and patterns in quiet voices. The engagement lasted 40 seconds. Mara dismantled the Vorathi drone the same way she had dismantled Dren, targeting the simulated nerve clusters and joint weaknesses. Riss destroyed the Krillian drone by exploiting the exact blind spot in the Krillian visual field that her species had never been able to evolve past. It was beautiful and brutal, and Vess recorded every second of it with her 4 eyes because she knew that this was something worth remembering. Mara accessed the drone command network and shut it down. Across the station, every combat drone froze in place. Keth's diversion team, which had been engaged in a fierce firefight at the cargo bay entrance, suddenly found themselves surrounded by motionless machines. Keth put his fist through the nearest frozen drone just to make sure it was actually disabled. It was. The extraction took another 20 minutes. 40 simulated civilians were moved through cleared corridors to the extraction point. The mission was completed in 43 minutes. 17 minutes under the deadline. 0 squad casualties. In the debriefing, Instructor Halloran reviewed the mission data with the expression of someone who had seen something unexpected but was determined not to show it. She noted the split approach, the adapted communication protocols, the species-specific combat assignments, and the efficiency of the command network shutdown. She did not praise the squad. She simply noted the results and dismissed them. After the debriefing, Keth caught Mara in the corridor, not to threaten her this time. He fell into step beside her, matching his long stride to her shorter one. which required him to walk at what must have been an uncomfortably slow pace. "You gave me the leadership," he said. It was not a question. Mara kept walking. "You are the squad leader. The plan was yours. The communication protocols were yours. The tactical assignments were yours. You made every decision that mattered, and then let me announce them. A plan that the squad leader endorses is a plan the squad follows. A plan that a back row human proposes is a plan that gets argued about for 45 minutes. Keth was quiet for several steps. You could have taken leadership, your plan, your mission. I do not want leadership. Then what do you want? Mara stopped walking. She looked up at Keth. He was nearly 3 feet taller than her. His 6 arms hung at his sides like weapons waiting to be deployed. His chitin armor could deflect small arms' fire. His jaws could crush steel, and he was looking at this small, soft, clawless human with something that was no longer unease. It was respect. "I want the mission to succeed," Mara said. "That is all I have ever wanted." Keth watched her go. Then he looked down at his 6 arms, each one capable of killing a human with a single squeeze. And he thought about the fact that this human had been 10 feet away from him for 43 minutes in confined spaces where she could not have dodged or run. And he had never once considered that he was in danger, but he was. He understood that now. He had been in danger the entire time. Not because Mara was hostile, but because she was capable of things that his predator instincts could not detect or predict. She moved through the world like a hidden current in deep water, invisible until you were already caught in it, and moving in the direction she wanted you to go. The second mission came 3 days later, and the third 2 days after that. Each one was harder than the last. Each one involved more variables, more enemies, more civilians, more pressure. And each one played out with the same pattern. Keth would present Mara's plan as his own. The squad would execute it. They would succeed. And Mara would walk back to her bunk in the corner and read her data pad and say nothing. By the fourth mission, Shezka had stopped fighting the pattern. Not because she liked Mara. She did not. But because the missions were succeeding, and Vorathi valued success above personal feelings. Tor had come around even faster, because Tor was young enough to change his mind without feeling like he had lost something. Rhys had developed a working rapport with Mara that was built entirely on nonverbal communication. They could coordinate in combat with nothing but eye movements and body positioning, a level of synchronization that usually took years to develop between species. Vess and Oren had become Mara's unofficial intelligence network. They gathered information about other squads, about instructor assessments, about the shifting social dynamics within the academy, and they funneled it to Mara through quiet conversations on the observation deck. In return, Mara shared her tactical analysis with them, giving them insight into combat patterns and species vulnerabilities that enriched their already formidable observational abilities. It was a symbiosis that benefited everyone, and Rhys had become something unexpected. He had become Mara's voice. In the barracks, in the mess hall, in the common areas where the human recruits gathered, Rhys talked about Squad 7's missions with the enthusiasm and energy that Mara would never display. He told stories. He exaggerated. He made the other humans laugh and the other species curious. And through his stories, Mara's strategies spread through the academy like a quiet infection. Other squads began using similar approaches. Other recruits began studying species-specific anatomy. The overall performance of the training cycle improved, and the instructors noticed, and they wondered why. Commander Varric noticed too. He had been watching Squad 7 since the first simulation. He had designed the squad composition himself, placing the most volatile mix of species and personalities together to see what would happen. He had expected the squad to implode. He had expected Mara to be crushed by the predators around her. Instead, the predators were orbiting her like planets around a star, pulled into her gravity without understanding the force that held them. Varric pulled Mara's file and read it again. He had read it before she arrived, of course. He read every recruit's file, but he had dismissed her file as unremarkable. Average scores, average physical metrics, no commendations, no disciplinary actions. A perfectly ordinary human recruit. He read it again now with different eyes, and he noticed something he had missed before. A small notation in the margins of her psychological evaluation, written by the human psychologist who had assessed her before she was sent to Pinnacle. The notation was a single word followed by a question mark. Varric closed the file. He sat in his office and looked out the window at the void of space, and for the first time in his long career, The old Vorathi warrior with the scarred face and the dead eye felt something he had not felt since the siege of Hollow Sun. He felt like he was being outmaneuvered by someone he could not see. The third phase of training at Pinnacle was called Trial. If assessment was the academy testing what recruits could do, and integration was the academy testing how they worked together, then Trial was the academy testing who they really were. The simulations ended. The controlled environments ended. Trial involved real missions in real space with real consequences. Not active combat zones, not yet, but border patrol operations, emergency response deployments, and diplomatic security assignments where the danger was genuine and the stakes were lives rather than rankings. Squad 7 was assigned to a border patrol rotation along the Ashenmere Corridor, a stretch of space between Coalition territory and the unaffiliated systems of the Outer Reach. The corridor was technically neutral territory, but in practice it was a lawless transit zone used by smugglers, pirates, and refugee convoys, fleeing conflicts that the Coalition preferred to pretend did not exist. Patrol duty along the corridor meant long shifts in cramped ships, sudden encounters with unidentified vessels, and the constant tension of knowing that any routine scan could turn into a firefight. The squad was assigned a light patrol craft called the Harken. It was a fast, lightly armoured ship designed for a crew of 10, which meant that 8 recruits and 2 supervising officers had just enough room to operate without stepping on each other. The supervising officers were Instructor Halloran and a Vorathi officer named Sub-Commander Drace, who had served in the corridor for 6 years and had the perpetually alert expression of someone who expected trouble at every moment because trouble had always arrived. For the first 2 weeks, the patrol was uneventful. The Harken scanned ships, checked cargo manifests, and escorted civilian transports through contested sectors. The work was tedious but necessary, and it gave the squad time to establish routines in a real operational environment. Keth commanded from the bridge with Sheska and Tor handling weapons and sensors. Rhys operated the secondary systems with the fluid speed that Cryolians brought to everything mechanical. Vess and Oren ran intelligence analysis, processing scanner data and cross-referencing it with known threat databases. Rhys handled communications and external coordination, and Mara served as the squad's tactical advisor, a position that did not officially exist, but that everyone tacitly acknowledged. She spent most of her time in the small space behind the bridge that served as a planning area. There was a holographic display table there that projected real-time maps of the surrounding space, and Mara spent hours studying the patterns of traffic through the corridor. She mapped routes, identified choke points, catalogued the behaviors of different vessel types, and built a predictive model of activity that grew more accurate with each passing day. Sub-Commander Drace watched her work with the grudging interest of a veteran who recognized competence but distrusted the species it came from. On the 15th day, the routine broke. The Harken was on the night cycle, which meant half the squad was sleeping while the other half monitored systems. Mara was awake, as she always seemed to be during the night cycle. She was at the holographic display when a signal appeared at the edge of scanner range. A distress beacon, standard Coalition frequency. The signal was coming from inside an asteroid field approximately 40 minutes away at full speed. Drace was the senior officer on watch. He assessed the signal and flagged it as a probable decoy. Pirate groups in the corridor frequently used fake distress beacons to lure patrol ships into asteroid fields where they could be ambushed. The standard protocol was to log the signal, report it to Sector Command, and continue the patrol. Sector Command would dispatch a dedicated response team if they deemed it worth investigating, which usually meant the signal would be ignored for hours or days while bureaucratic wheels turned. Mara studied the signal. She pulled up her traffic model and cross-referenced the beacon frequency with known patterns. Then she turned to Drace and said, "This is not a decoy." Drace looked at her with his one functioning eye. The other had been replaced with a cybernetic implant after an encounter with pirates 4 years ago. Every fake beacon looks real, recruit. That is the point of a fake beacon. Mara brought up the holographic display and pointed to a series of data points. Over the past 6 days, 3 refugee convoys from the Kasali system have passed through this sector. The convoys were carrying approximately 1,200 civilians fleeing a regional conflict. The first 2 convoys passed through without incident. The third was due to arrive in this sector 14 hours ago. It has not arrived. No communication, no transponder signal, no scanner trace. She pointed to the distress beacon. The beacon frequency matches the emergency systems used by Kessali civilian transports. The location is consistent with the convoy's projected route if they diverted to avoid a scanner shadow in this sector. Here, which has been used by pirate groups to conceal their positions in the past. The convoy encountered something in the asteroid field. This beacon is from a civilian ship, and it has been transmitting for approximately 11 hours, which means whatever happened started when we were at the far end of our patrol route and unable to detect the signal. Trace was quiet for a moment. He looked at the data. He looked at Mara. He looked at the data again. Then he picked up the internal comms and woke the rest of the squad. Halloran arrived on the bridge 2 minutes later, pulling on her uniform jacket with the practiced speed of someone who had been roused from sleep by emergencies more times than she could count. Drace briefed her. Halloran looked at Mara's analysis on the holographic display. She asked one question. "How certain are you?" Mara said, 87%. Halloran nodded. "Set course." The Harkin changed heading and accelerated toward the asteroid field. The squad moved to battle stations, which on a ship this small meant everyone went to their assigned positions and tried not to think about how thin the hull was. Keth took the command chair with the authority of someone who had grown into the role over the past weeks. Sheska armed the weapon systems. Tar monitored the shields. Riss ran the scanners at maximum sensitivity, her Krillian reflexes processing the incoming data faster than any automated system could. Vess and Oren positioned themselves at the intelligence stations, all 8 of their combined eyes focused on different screens. Reese opened a channel to Sector Command and reported their change of course. Sector Command acknowledged and told them to proceed with caution, which was military language for "you are on your own." Mara stood behind Keth's chair, watching the holographic display as the asteroid field grew closer. The field was dense, a thick cluster of rocks ranging from pebble size to the dimensions of small moons, all tumbling slowly in the gravitational eddies of a long-dead star. Navigation through the field required constant course corrections, and the asteroids created sensor shadows that could hide anything from a shuttle to a warship. They found the convoy 32 minutes after changing course, or what was left of it. 3 civilian transports, each designed to carry 400 passengers, were scattered among the asteroids. 2 of them were dark. No power, no life signs, their hulls breached in multiple locations by weapons fire. They were drifting, dead ships in a dead field, slowly spinning as the asteroid gravity pulled them apart. The 3rd transport was partially powered, running on emergency systems, and it was the source of the distress beacon. Scanner readings showed approximately 340 life signs aboard, clustered in the interior compartments away from the hull breaches. There were also 4 other ships in the asteroid field, smaller, faster, armed. They were positioned around the surviving transport in a loose formation that Mara recognized immediately. It was a harvesting pattern. The pirate ships were not trying to destroy the transport. They were trying to board it. They wanted the passengers. In the outer reach, living beings were cargo. Slaves for labor camps, hostages for ransom, biological material for the illegal medical trade. 1,200 refugees had become a commodity, and the pirates had already consumed 2/3 of the supply. The bridge was silent as the scanner data populated the holographic display. 860 people on the 2 dead ships. Gone. 340 on the surviving transport, with 4 armed pirate vessels closing in. Keth looked at the display. His chitin plates were locked tight against his body, which meant he was controlling a strong emotional response. Draken felt anger deeply, physically, and Keth's body was radiating heat that the bridge sensors registered as a 2-degree increase in ambient temperature. He said, "We engage." Dre said, "We're a light patrol craft with recruit crew. Those are armed pirate vessels with experienced crews. Protocol requires us to hold position and wait for reinforcements. Reinforcements will take 6 hours to arrive from the nearest patrol base. The pirates will have boarded the transport and disappeared into the outer reach long before then." "That is correct. And that is still protocol." Keth turned to look at Drace. All 6 of his arms were braced on the armrests of the command chair. His small black eyes were flat and hard. 340 people will be taken as slaves. Yes. And protocol says we watch. Protocol says we document and report and wait for a response that is equipped to handle the situation. Halloran had not spoken. She was leaning against the bulkhead behind the bridge, arms crossed, watching the exchange. Mara noticed that Halloran was not looking at Keth or Drace. She was looking at Mara, and there was something in the instructor's eyes that Mara recognized. It was a test, not an academy test, not a scored evaluation, a real test. The kind that determined what someone was made of when the rules said one thing and the situation said another. Mara stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not interrupt. She waited for a natural pause and then she spoke, and her quiet voice cut through the tension on the bridge like a blade through silk. There is a third option. Everyone looked at her. She pulled up the holographic display and adjusted the scale. The pirate vessels are positioned for boarding, not for combat. Their weapons are oriented toward the transport, not toward external threats. Their formation is optimized for coordinated boarding action, which means their ships are close together and their escape vectors are limited by the asteroid density. They are not expecting a patrol ship because the distress beacon has been transmitting for 11 hours without a response. They believe they are alone. She highlighted the asteroid field around the pirate formation. The field provides cover for approach. If we cut engines and drift through this corridor, here, using the gravitational pull of this large asteroid, we can reach weapons range before they detect us. We will have approximately 90 seconds of surprise. In 90 seconds, a light patrol craft with a full weapons load can disable at least 2 of the 4 pirate vessels if the targeting is precise. Ah! She looked at Sheska. Can you hit critical systems on a moving target at close range in low visibility conditions? Sheska's scales shifted to a deep, aggressive green. Her teeth showed. I can hit the pilot's chair through the viewport. Mara almost smiled. It was the closest anyone had ever seen to actual expression from her. Good. We disabled 2 ships in the first 90 seconds. The remaining 2 ships will break formation to engage us. When they break formation, they create an opening in the boarding cordon around the transport. Reese, you broadcast on the civilian emergency channel and tell the transport to run. Full power, any direction, just move. Reese nodded. Done. The 2 remaining pirate ships now have a choice. Chase the transport or fight us. They will not split up because pirate crews do not trust each other enough to divide their force. They will choose based on which target offers the better cost-benefit calculation. A patrol craft that has already demonstrated it can disable their allies is a higher threat than a fleeing civilian transport. They will engage us. Keth leaned forward, and then we fight. And then we fight. 2 pirate ships against 1 patrol craft in an asteroid field. The odds are not good, but they are better than 4 pirate ships against 1 patrol craft, and they are infinitely better than 340 people being sold as slaves. The bridge was quiet. Drace looked at the display. He looked at the pirate formation. He looked at the asteroid corridors. He ran the numbers in his head, the same numbers he had been running for 6 years on this corridor. Then he looked at Halloran. Halloran uncrossed her arms. She said one word, go. Keth gave the order. The Harkin cut engines and entered the asteroid field on a drift trajectory, using the gravitational currents between the rocks to carry them silently toward the pirate formation. The bridge went dark. All non-essential systems shut down. The crew moved in the dim red glow of emergency lighting, communicating in whispers and hand signals that Mara had taught them weeks ago. Risk guided the ship through the asteroid field with her Krillian reflexes, making micro-adjustments with thrusters that barely registered on the ship's own sensors. Vess and Orin tracked the pirate vessels with passive scanners, their 4 eyes each processing different data streams simultaneously. Sheska sat at the weapons console with her claws hovering over the firing controls, her scales so dark they were almost black, her entire body locked in the predator stillness that preceded a killing strike. They reached weapons range in 14 minutes. The pirate ships had not moved. They had not changed their formation. They did not know the Harkin was there. Mara counted down from 10. She used hand signals. The bridge crew watched her hands in the red light. 10, 9, 8. Steady breaths. 7, 6. Sheska's claws touched the controls. 4, 3, 2. Riss brought the engines to standby. 1. Keth said, fire. Sheska fired. 2 bursts from the Harkin's forward plasma cannons, each one precisely targeted at the engine assemblies of the 2 nearest pirate vessels. The plasma bolts crossed the distance in less than a second and hit with the accuracy that Sheska had promised. 2 explosions lit up the asteroid field. 2 pirate ships went dark, their engines destroyed, their power systems cascading into failure. Reese hit the civilian emergency channel and his voice boomed across the frequency. Coalition patrol to civilian transport. You are clear to move. Repeat, you are clear. Get out of here now. The civilian transport's engines flared to life. It was battered, scarred, leaking atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches, but it could still move. It turned and accelerated away from the pirate formation, heading for open space with 340 lives aboard. The two remaining pirate ships reacted exactly as Mara had predicted. They broke formation and turned toward the Harken. Their weapons charged, their engines burned hot, and they came in fast, angry, and focused. The next 8 minutes were the longest of every recruit's life. The Harken was not built for prolonged combat. It was a patrol craft, fast and agile but lightly armored and lightly armed. The two pirate ships were converted freighters with bolted-on weapon systems and reinforced hulls, heavier and slower but capable of absorbing far more punishment. In an open space engagement, the pirates would have won through attrition, but they were not in open space. They were in an asteroid field, and the asteroid field was Mara's weapon. She directed the engagement from behind Keth's chair, calling out maneuvers and positioning in that flat, calm voice that never wavered. She used the asteroids as shields, as barriers, as weapons. She threaded the Harken through gaps that the larger pirate ships could not follow, drawing them into channels where their maneuverability was restricted, and the Harken's smaller profile became an advantage. She timed turns around massive rocks so that the pirates lost targeting lock for critical seconds. She identified structural weaknesses in individual asteroids and had Sheska shoot them, causing fragmentation cascades that peppered the pirate hulls with shrapnel. Riss flew the ship with a skill that transcended species. Her hands moved across the flight controls in patterns that the human-designed interface had never been intended to accept, and the ship responded as if it understood her Krillian instincts. She flew by feel, by reflex, by the deep predator awareness of three-dimensional space that her aquatic ancestors had evolved over millions of years. And she followed Mara's directions because she had learned in the simulations that Mara's directions were always right. Tor managed the shields with Avority's stubborn refusal to accept damage. Every hit that got through the asteroid cover, he redistributed power to absorb.